Good morning, welcome to NMS. I thought I'd do this video to explain the energy systems of the body so you can understand what they do and what they're good for, okay, and how they sort of interlink with each other, okay, during exercise, or even not only during exercise but during rest, okay, because you're still producing energy. So during rest there is still breakdown of fats, carbohydrates, so forth, to go and create energy. Now, the first system we've got is the creatine phosphate system, okay? Now, creatine is in the muscle in the form of phosphate, okay? When you take more creatine, you raise your levels of creatine phosphate. And what that does is it donates that phosphate to ADP to form ATP, and that ATP is used for energy in the body. Think of it like, US dollars, okay? Now, what it does is it uses that energy, okay, to do work. Work might be lifting weights, okay? Or it might be sprinting or whatever. But it breaks down that creatine phosphate, okay? And once that starts to be depleted, your next energy system comes into play. And that is your lactic system. Now that lactic system, what it does is it takes glucose in this sort of process of glycolysis, and it breaks down the glucose into what's called pyruvate, and the pyruvate then can form lactic acid, okay? And this whole process here can form up to 4 ATPs of energy, which can be used for work, okay? Now, that lactic acid, obviously, something needs to be done with that, so it gets shuttled back to the liver, and the liver slowly converts it back into glucose, okay? Now, the breakdown of glucose into lactic acid, that creates energy. The actual liver going and converting this lactic acid into glucose again, that requires energy, okay? Now, that energy doesn't have to come from glucose, by the way. It can actually come from fatty acids, okay? And this is, I guess, the epoch that they're talking about, exercise post-oxygen consumption, okay? So when you're resting after exercise, your body is now trying to get rid of that lactic acid, okay? It takes that lactic acid through the blood, converts it, sends it back to the liver and converts it back into glucose. Now, your third energy system, okay, is the slower system, okay? Doesn't require oxygen. The first two does require, oxygen, but the first two systems do not, okay? So glycolysis and then formation of lactic acid doesn't require oxygen, and the conversion of creatine phosphate to creatine and the formation of ATP doesn't require oxygen. So those systems, they're very good, okay? You can do them under heavy load where you don't need to get enough oxygen in. The oxygen debt comes from the recovery afterwards, okay? Now, with the oxidation system, which is basically your body going and taking, let's say, the pyruvate, and then decides to go and break that down into carbon dioxide and water through what's called the citric acid cycle and the electron transfer chain, which is, breaking down and oxidizing that pyruvate into acetyl-CoA and then into a whole sort of different intermediates that create energy, okay? When that system occurs, okay, it requires a lot of oxygen, and it's a very slow conversion of glucose into energy. So it requires a lot of, energy, or a lot of time, to be able to do that process. But on the other hand, okay, the glycolysis going into lactic acid is much quicker. Now, the other thing that can be converted into energy, okay, in that citric acid cycle is fatty acids. So what the body does is it breaks down fatty acids via beta oxidation, they call it, and that goes into the citric acid cycle, and then that gets broken down for energy as well. So that third energy system can use glucose, or it can use fatty acids for energy, okay? Now, the good thing about that system is that that can happen during rest, and it can also happen during low intensity activity, okay? It doesn't mean that you're not using the lactic system, but it means you're using that lactic system far less than the oxidative system. okay? This probably came in at the beginning and then reduced, and then this system started producing more of the ATP at the end, okay? Now, what complicates it even more is the oxidative system needs more oxygen, hence the oxidative, so that's aerobic energy. This system doesn't require oxygen, right? But you have 3 different distinct muscle fibers in the body. You have what's called the fast-twitch fibers, which don't have a mitochondria and cannot do oxidative breakdown. It can only do glycolysis into lactic acid, okay? So your fast-twitch fibers are capable of creating lots of force in a hurry, and they're also capable of, undergoing muscular growth, okay? Hypertrophy, much greater than the slow-twitch muscle fibers, but they don't have the ability to go and use oxygen. The slow-twitch muscle fibers have that ability, okay? And so the slow-twitch fibers and the metabolic fibers have a mitochondria. The slow-twitch fibers have more mitochondria and can actually undergo oxidative breakdown or metabolism or aerobic exercise much better, okay, than the metabolic fibers, and the slow-twitch fibers can't do that, okay? Simple. Now, so that means that during intense exercise, you're mainly using fast-twitch fibers. You're using slow-twitch, but you're mainly using your fast-twitch fibers. During aerobic exercise, you're mainly using your slow-twitch fibers, but you don't need as much force production, okay? And, obviously during the first part of explosive exercise, you're using mainly creatine phosphate, and then you're using lactic acid, okay? And so you can use those fast-twitch fibers and the metabolic fibers at that time, but you're not using much of the slow-twitch fibers, not at the beginning of a set, because it takes too long for that third system to come into play. Now, in obviously looking at those 3 systems working together, how does that work out with exercise? Well, obviously if you're doing intense weight training, you need glucose for energy. If you're doing less intense aerobic exercise, you can use fatty acids, or you can use glucose for energy, okay? And the body will use them interchangeably, okay? But it'll use more of what it has. So if you have glycogen stored in the muscles, it's probably going to use more glycogen, and as it depletes of glycogen, it's probably going to use more fatty acids. Now, fatty acids, by the way, take even longer to break down than glucose, so you're going to require more oxygen to break down fats than you do glucose, and certainly a lot more oxygen than you do for your breakdown into lactic acid. So I hope that sort of explains the energy systems for you, and understanding how you move between them, and why we do aerobic exercise, but why we also do high intensity exercise, because a bigger muscle burns more energy, okay? But if you're doing more aerobic exercise, you can use more fatty acids, but that doesn't always mean that you're going to lose fat. It just means that it's burning them more, okay? Obviously, fat loss comes down to, are you actually in a calorie deficit? Because if you got more fatty acids and in your diet and less carbohydrates, your body will break down fatty acids, but that doesn't mean you lose them. So ketogenesis may mean that you're using more fats for ketones, but that doesn't actually mean you're losing fat, okay? So it still comes down to a calorie deficit, but you'll use more glucose when you do more weight training. You'll use less glucose and more fatty acids when you're doing aerobic exercise. And it also depends on which one you're taking in as well, okay? Now, quite simply, guys, you don't have to worry too much about your body going and using different energy systems. It does that interchangeably. What you need to do is look at your type of exercise you're doing. If you're doing more aerobic, that's going to burn more fats. So you interchange aerobic with fast twitch exercise, and you've got bigger muscles that burn more energy, and then you do aerobic to burn fat. Hope you got something out of this video. Like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel, and I'm going to be doing a lot more videos to be able to help you on these sorts of things. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.